In the land of ancient Egypt, a queen defied the norms, rising above convention to claim the throne as her own. Witness the captivating tale of Hatshepsut, the enigmatic ruler who shattered boundaries and became the indomitable king of the Nile. If you've heard of Queens Nefertiti and Cleopatra, but not Hatshepsut, you're not alone. Between the years 1473 and 1458 BCE, Egypt's 18th dynasty was ruled by an outstanding pharaoh named Hatshepsut. Long if the other two ladies mentioned above were also powerful, only Hatshepsut was a brilliant ruler to the point where her successor was still envious of her long after she had passed away, to the point where he defiled her temples and monuments by carving his own sigil on top of them. She was so important to him. In point of fact, information of Hatshepsut's existence and leadership were pieced together millennia after her reign had ended when a Gothard happened upon a royal stash. Priests who lived at the time of Hatshepsut had hidden her valuables and her body, along with other objects they feared might be stolen, in a storage tomb that was more or less improvised for the purpose. They hid it so well that it stayed hidden for more than 2,000 years, but let's rewind and begin this narrative at the beginning of her existence. Pharaoh Thutmose I and Om's, his great wife, the title given to the major spouse of a pharaoh, had Hatshepsut as their first and oldest child. Hatshepsut was the eldest daughter. If Hatshepsut had been born a man, she would have been the most likely candidate to succeed to the throne. When Thutmose I passed away, Hatshepsut was just 12 years old, and because Om's did not have a son, the royal family was forced to undertake some judgments that we, living in modern times, would consider to be abhorrent. The royal family followed the pattern of consolidating power, and they did so by marrying Hatshepsut to her half-brother Thutmose II. This allowed the royal family to maintain their position as the most powerful family in Egypt. Pharaoh Thutmose I had a number of secondary women, and one of them gave birth to Thutmose II. Thutmose II was the eldest son of Thutmose I. Even Thutmose II had a short lifespan. There was only ever one child born to him and Queen Hatshepsut's union. The succession of the monarchy was determined by the genealogy, so his baby son Thutmose III, who was the product of one of his secondary marriages, became the next king. When Hatshepsut's stepson and half-nephew, who was also the same person, reached the age of majority, Hatshepsut assumed the role of queen regent and ruled Egypt in the interim. Thutmose III received the training he needed to become an effective leader from Hatshepsut, who sent him to military school. In the 7th year of her rule as proxy and regent, however, Hatshepsut decided that she had had enough of ruling in all but title. She went against the norm and declared herself Pharaoh of Egypt. The grab for more power did not garner universally positive feedback. However, historian Joshua J. Mark asserts that Hatshepsut's reign was the most prosperous and peaceful in Egypt's history, and he gives her credit for successful trade, a booming economy, and many public works projects during her time in power. Specifically, she embarked on a commercial venture that included the importation of exotic goods from faraway lands such as ivory, ebony, gold, leopard skins, and incense. According to historian Elizabeth B. Wilson, Hatshepsut was also responsible for a number of ambitious building projects, such as her funerary temple at Deir el-Bahri and 2 obelisks at the Karnak Temple that were 100 feet tall. The building of those obelisks was also no laughing matter. They represent an absolutely extraordinary advancement in architectural design. Upper Egyptian limestone quarries were the source of the shapes, which were meticulously carved by artisans working horizontally. In order to load the 450-ton statues into the boats, ramps of wet sand were used, and elephants were used for their strength. The boats were then carried higher by the water when the Nile's annual flood arrived. The obelisks were transported to the temple at Karnak, further downstream with the assistance of 850 oarsmen. After the floods of the Nile subsided, additional elephants pulled the obelisks up new ramps of wet sand, where they were carefully placed into position. When the laborers arrived, the foundation for the obelisks had already been surveyed and dug by the workers. Despite the fact that Hatshepsut maintained the army at its highest level of effectiveness throughout her entire reign, Egypt remained in a state of peace during this time. This is a fact that may be even more significant than the marvels themselves. Hatshepsut passed away when she was in the middle of her 40s and was laid to rest in the Valley of the Kings. She had her father, Pharaoh Thutmose I, exhumed and reburied beside her so that her legacy would be more permanently etched into the annals of history. Why, however, did it take modern culture so long to recognize Hatshepsut when she had taken all of these steps to ensure that her legacy would go on? There is much more to a person's story after death, as is the case with all of the stories that come from ancient Egypt. To begin, in 1903, when Howard Carter unearthed the first of 3 sarcophagi that belonged to Hatshepsut, the sarcophagus was empty. Herbert Winlock, the lead archaeologist of the Egyptian team at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was the one who excavated the temple complex at Deir el-Bahri in 1927. He found that the temple had been completely desecrated. Elizabeth Wilson states that the statues of Hatshepsut had their eyes gouged out, heads lopped off, and the cobra-like symbol of royalty hacked from foreheads. This refers to the destruction of the monuments. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III obliterated all traces of her reign, obliterating evidence of her unquestionable achievements, or possibly because of them. He removed her name from public monuments and had his own image etched on top of the one that had been there previously. Thutmose III even went so far as to change the dates of his reign in order to give the appearance that he was responsible for Hatshepsut's achievements. During the time that Hatshepsut was queen, she elevated Thutmose III to the position of supreme commander of the Egyptian armed forces. He had not been wasting his time at the court. Rather, he had been leading armies on victorious conquering missions. But the question is, why did he defile her monuments? It's possible that he wanted to get rid of her as a forceful example of a female monarch, or that he sought to close the gap in the dynasty's line of male succession. Both of these are plausible explanations. Misogyny and jealousy can be traced back to the origin of almost all of the official doctrines. In addition, the life of the Lady King became the subject of a veritable soap opera, in which she was portrayed as a power-hungry and lustful woman who may have been assassinated by her stepson out of revenge. However, Thutmose III did not entirely remove all traces of Hatshepsut from her funeral temple, since doing so would have prevented her from being memorialized, and the ancient Egyptians held the belief that one's legacy could be preserved by being remembered. Although Thutmose III seems to have ordered this extreme measure, there is no evidence of any animosity between him and his stepmother. More importantly, he left the story of her divine birth and expedition to punt relatively untouched inside her mortuary temple. The only mention of her that was removed was from the public record. This would imply that he did not hold any personal ill will against Hatshepsut, but rather that he was aiming to destroy any overt sign of a powerful female pharaoh. Despite this, Hatshepsut was forgotten within 2 generations, and it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that she was rediscovered. This was made possible by the Rosetta Stone, which permitted the reading of hieroglyphics. In point of fact, the real mummy of Hatshepsut was not unearthed until the year 2007. It wasn't until then, thousands of years after she lived, that we found the reason she passed away was due to an infection in her teeth. The extracted molar was found in a wooden box with Hatshepsut's name written on it, and this was the sole piece of evidence that could positively identify the mummy as belonging to Hatshepsut. Hopefully, we will see you in the next video.